The following is a special presentation of ABC News. Triumph in the Desert. Excerpts from a photo history of the Gulf War. A commemorative book assembled by the editors of Random House, featuring the work of the world's leading photojournalists. And ABC News television coverage of the Gulf War. Excerpts of the images photographed by ABC News cameras and the reporting of ABC News correspondents as they too documented the triumph in the desert.
The situation inside Kuwait is serious. We have occupied all the important facilities in Kuwait.
And then there was sporadic street fighting.
This is the British Embassy in Kuwait. It is very dangerous to venture outside your house.
They are commanding the whole country
Free Provisional Government of
with
Kuwait
their fingers.
has requested our government to assist it to establish security and order.
On August 2nd, 1990, Iraq's Saddam Hussein sent hundreds of his tanks and soldiers streaming across Iraq's southern border to invade and conquer his next-door neighbor, Kuwait. Within days, American military forces were en route to the Persian Gulf. The United States and its allies had drawn a line in the sand. The first steps were underway to force Hussein to retreat. Hundreds of thousands of U.S. soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines were on their way to confront Iraq. September 14th, 1990, aboard the U.S. battleship Wisconsin, part of a 100-ship U.S. Armada gathered in the Persian Gulf area. American sailors getting a pep talk from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colin Powell. Powell and other top brass had gone to the Gulf to survey their forces, on land, in the air, and at sea.
When we launch it, we will launch it violently. We will launch it in a way that will make it decisive so that we can get it over as quickly as possible, and there's no question who won when it's over, so that we can then start the process of rebuilding Kuwait and sending our forces back home.
The defense secretary and his top general sounded belligerent. Saddam Hussein shows no sign of leaving Kuwait, they told the troops, and prospects for peace appear to be worsening.
It increasingly looks like he doesn't have the message and that we may in fact be required to use force to get him out. The question is, are we just going to fight in Kuwait or are we going to level Baghdad? No comment.
What if Saddam Hussein withdraws from most, but not all, of Kuwait?
The only acceptable outcome is for him to get completely and totally out of Kuwait.
The tough talk generally played well, but some troops were still worried.
I think all in all, the rest of us would like to go home and say we deterred aggression instead of actually having to go into conflict.
And a soldier from the 101st Airborne wanted to know, is the U.S. really ready to fight?
Well, I think we're ready. Parts of the force are ready at different times. Are you guys ready?
We tried to give them some good advice a few months ago. We told them move it or lose it. They wouldn't move it, and now they're going to lose it.
On January 16, 1991, the Allies launched their air war against Iraq. An armada of 1,800 American warplanes took to the sky and within 5 weeks achieved total air supremacy over Iraq and Kuwait. 80,000 sorties were flown from bases all over the Arabian Peninsula and from carriers like the USS Independence. The powerful flying machines of the Allied air campaign. U.S. military officials today said they had experienced such great success in the air during the past few days that Allied warplanes have now taken out 1/3 of all Iraqi armor, artillery, and tanks in Kuwait and southern Iraq. 1,300 tanks, 800 armored vehicles, 1,100 artillery pieces, more than double the number reported 1 week ago. The British, who displayed gun sight video, said more than half of the 600 hardened aircraft shelters on their target list had been bombed.
That attack was successful. It will have been a direct hit. And as we move across, you just get some idea of the sort of scale. This is one corner of an airfield.
U.S. pilots today prepared for their part in the campaign, bombing defensive positions or revetments in Kuwait.
There must be 70 or 80 revetments right up in there. Probably half of them have things in it. So I'm just planning on going back there.
The Gulf War was fast and decisive, but in many ways the Allied victory is not a model for future wars. The U.S.-led forces had 6 months to prepare and had unique facilities from which to launch their attack. Tony Cordesman.
In this war, for the first time in air war history, the command and control assets and targeting capabilities caught up with the speed of the plane. And that combination of the electronic battlefield and precision have revolutionized the lethality of attack capability from the air.
This war saw the first truly effective use of precision weapons, from Tomahawk cruise missiles to laser-guided smart bombs. Theater commanders said the weapons were accurate 60 to 80% of the time, although the British admitted during the war that sometimes there were failures. On a raid against a bridge in the Iraqi city of Fallujah, one of the bombs hit a residential neighborhood. Time and time again, the U.S.-led coalition overwhelmed the Iraqis with technology. This was the war in which the F-117 stealth aircraft, invisible to radar, proved itself by getting to the target before the Iraqis could respond.
It cuts down on the enemy reaction time, and it cuts down on the numbers of weapons he can bring to bear against your particular force.
If anything slowed down the Allied air campaign, it was the inability to know what it had destroyed. The assessment of battle damage could not keep pace with the tempo of air operations. Damage to underground shelters and to the interior of armored vehicles was often impossible to see with aerial reconnaissance.
If you don't have accurate battle damage assessment, you have no way to know whether you are using your air power efficiently. You may be killing and re-killing. You may be wasting assets costing millions of dollars.
In only 5.5 weeks, the Allies revolutionized air warfare and learned valuable lessons. But it was not a full test of modern air power, given Iraq's failure to mount a serious challenge. In the Allied victory, the eyes had it. With infrared, light-amplifying goggles, coalition soldiers could fight at night. They could see what their enemy could not.
This is the battlefield in the Gulf, the way a tank commander looks at it. It is an odd color, a kind of yellow-green photo-negative, because this is night as seen through special goggles. Both soldiers and commanders in the U.S. military say they prefer to do their fighting after dark. Some equipment lets them see about 3/4 as well as they would in daytime.
We see about a good 300 meters with a night scope. We got PVS-7s that can see a good 100, 200 meters with them. We see a lot farther than the Iraqis can, so we hope to see them first.
Night fighting is an expensive proposition. Goggles for the individual soldier cost $23,000, and they are hardly perfect. Peripheral vision is one thing that suffers. Helicopter pilots who wear them say they cut depth perception as well. Infantrymen are using starlight scopes, which allow them to pinpoint Iraqi soldiers at night and at a distance. Some tools for conquering the darkness are built into large weapon systems. U.S. tanks, especially the M1, can see in the dark. And anti-tank weapons such as tow missiles have thermal sights. They can focus on targets up to 6 miles away.
With night vision lenses, the desert becomes surreal. Depth perception is distorted. The horizon is hard to distinguish. Too much light, even from a cigarette lighter, ruins night vision. And there are not enough night goggles for all the soldiers who are here. So combat, confusing in daylight, can become chaotic in the dark.
ITG team up!
Although U.S. commanders have an advantage over Iraq out here at night, they also know the dark desert is dangerous.
For the troops of Operation Desert Storm, a major concern was the enemy's chemical weapons. During the ground war, these Marines of the 1st Division Task Force wore gas masks as enemy shells whistled overhead. Saddam Hussein never did resort to chemical warfare, but the hot plastic headgear was in every Allied pack. U.S. troops were prepared for Hussein's deadly chemical arsenal.
At a recent recreational softball game, a team of Marines jokingly played with their gas masks on. It was grim humor. U.S. soldiers know the prospect of chemical warfare is nothing to laugh about. In fact, several times a day, units are given snap drills to test their response time.
The idea is that we want to have our soldiers as trained as possible so that when an NBC attack occurs, that they will just react without thinking.
NBC, nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare.
We have to go out there to find out what's out there, right?
Classes in self-protection are given daily. The impression is lasting.
Every morning, noon, and night, I think about this chemical warfare.
Every American soldier has been issued a full protective suit. Their gas masks are always at their sides.
This is my best friend as of now.
In the field, there is practice in decontamination of weapons.
You gonna dip your brush in STB? You gonna start brushing down on you? Yeah.
Of vehicles, and of people.
Could you fight in that suit?
Yeah, you could.
Do you know how?
How to? Well, it's not really basically any different than fighting without it. You just sweat a little more.
You just sweat a little more.
Yeah.
Are you sweating now?
Yes, I am.
Could you take the mask off for us? Now, realistically, if it were 120 degrees, how long do you think you could keep that on?
Well, like I said, it just depends on your individual, you know. You can't really say how far you could last in it.
Inside each of your gas masks, you have how many atropine injectors? Okay.
Some officers say the danger of chemical weapons is exaggerated.
The press is overrating the effectiveness of chemical weapons at a tactical level because of the systems they have to deliver them and the inaccuracies in those systems. I think the greatest problem with chemical weapons at this point is psychological on the soldiers.
American soldiers say if Iraq strikes with chemical weapons, they'll be ready. They just hope they won't have to prove it.
They called him Stormin' Norman, General H. Norman Schwarzkopf, commander of Allied forces in the Persian Gulf. His job? To oust Saddam Hussein from Kuwait and to cripple the Iraqi war machine. As a commanding general, he was tough and calculating. As a man, he was not afraid to display emotion for his troops and the sacrifices they endured. Desert Storm and Stormin' Norman.
Anything you all want to know? If I don't know the answer, I'll just make it up.
The general arrived here only 4 days ago. Today was his first chance to see, and more importantly, to be seen, to rally the troops against Saddam Hussein.
Let's face it, if he dares come across that border and come down here, I'm completely confident that we're going to kick his butt when he gets here.
He made a lot of promises, radios to relieve the boredom, laundry facilities, and eventually R&R in the cool mountains of Germany. A not too subtle sign these troops may be here for a while.
I thought maybe we'd take you to Garmisch and take you right out of the desert and put you in the snow.
Ironically, just before Iraq invaded Kuwait, Schwarzkopf staged a training exercise based on a hypothetical crisis in the Middle East. Today, he told officers he knows exactly what to do, and they told him exactly what he wanted to hear.
We've been trying to get everybody bedded down, make sure everybody's got what they need to go to war.
Schwarzkopf has been there before, in Grenada and in Vietnam, where he won 2 Purple Hearts. He remembers the humiliation of that war and tells his troops this time it's different.
American troops are the best people in the whole world, and they deserve all the support they can get, and they got it this time.
No mention today of any problems, no talk of delayed equipment. In fact, the general boasted he's ahead of schedule.
We're going home. We're going home alive. We're not going to go home dead. We're going to go home alive with a big victory under our belts.
Here's the man who runs the show. Out today to see his soldiers and check their spirits in preparation for a ground battle that could be bloody, which he may soon have to recommend.
I'd like to have Saddam Hussein sit on that. What do you think about that? This Charlie Rock?
Yes, sir.
You all know how to put steel on the target?
Yes, sir.
That's what they tell me. You all ready to go?
Check, yes, sir.
He is H. Norman Schwarzkopf, 4-star general. Stormin' Norman, some call him. General, why do they call you Stormin' Norman?
I don't know where that name came from. People attribute it to my temper, I guess.
Do you have a temper?
Yeah, I have a temper. But not as it's been described. I don't throw things, I can assure you that. Somebody said I get mad, I scream profanities all over the place, and I throw things. That's not true.
The nickname he prefers is the Bear.
The troops gave me that name. I think it started when I was in Alaska. Probably had something to do with my size. I'm sure it had
Something to do with your size. How big are you?
I'm 6'3½", weigh probably about 240 right now.
Is that overweight?
No, I don't think so. Anybody that thinks it is, I'd be happy to take them on, and we could find out.
Did you ever think I would like to be in command of a large army that may be called by the country to go into battle?
No, I don't think so. I know my roommates have said we sat around and talked about it as young cadets, and we probably did it at that time. I don't remember talking about it, but I certainly never sat back and said, one day I'm going to be in charge of huge armies, of my country.
You only have to watch him brief the press in Riyadh to sense the self-assurance of command.
Is this a question or a statement, okay? I need to know.
Both. And allow the American people and the
answer to your question is I will...
And he dazzles his audience with the range of his personality. There is anger.
But as I said, the International Red Cross has inspected our POW camps. I challenge the Iraqis right now to do the same damn thing in their POW camps. And look at how they're treating our people and the other coalition POWs.
There is black humor.
I'm now going to show you a picture of the luckiest man in Iraq on this particular day. Look at here. Right through the crosshairs. And now in his rearview mirror.
There is blunt language.
I would describe that report as bovine scatology. Okay, better referred to by the troops as BS. I don't know who that guy's source is, but he ought to get a new source because his source is a liar.
There is dreadful menace.
Okay, with regard to Saddam Hussein saying that he has met the best that the coalition has to offer, I would only say the best is yet to come.
Schwarzkopf directs the shooting war aimed at getting Saddam, at least getting him out of Kuwait, from deep underground in the Saudi capital of Riyadh. The nerve center is the war room. No outsider gets through this door, behind which Schwarzkopf sits at a central desk, aides at U-shaped tables on either side. And down the hall and around the corner is the general's personal quarters, one room where he lives. On his desk, Rommel, the Desert Fox, tactics of modern tank warfare. Across the desk, the secure telephones that connect him with his command and with Washington. Then there are the pictures of his family.
I got a great wife who's put up with me for 23 years. I've got 2 wonderful daughters. One of them is 20, the other's 21, and I got a 13-year-old son. Got a 6-year-old dog. Got a couple of parakeets in the house and a cat. That's the family.
In the other half of this small room, the general's bed with camouflage blanket. On his nightstand, his Bible with camouflage cover. The next day's uniform, smartly pressed and ready. His video cassette player, that's the PBS Civil War series he's watching, and a shotgun. For bird hunting? Hardly. Schwarzkopf says if a terrorist should make it past his guards, the shotgun's for him. By the way, about those secure telephones. On his command instrument, 2 American Indian feathers. Schwarzkopf is an honorary chief in the Osage tribe. And on the red phone, we noticed that even though the general says he's being left alone to run the show, there's a direct line to the White House.
You talk to the White House?
No, the White House talks. That's the White House switchboard. They call me all the time to make sure they can get me anytime they have to. But I have not punched that button myself. As far as Saddam Hussein being a great military strategist, he is neither a strategist, nor is he schooled in the operational art, nor is he a tactician, nor is he a general, nor is he as a soldier. Other than that, he's a great military man. I want you to know that.
In 100 hours, the speed and cunning of coalition ground forces defeated Iraq's military machine. The coalition's 3,000 tanks overcame the enemy's 5,000. One of the biggest tank forces in the world went down to defeat.
They rolled into Iraq on the first day of the war and spent the next 2 chasing an enemy on the run. They were looking for someone to fight. Yesterday morning, they found him. Some of the Republican Guard in Soviet-built tanks finally turned, having decided to defend their homeland. And the 3rd Armored's 3rd Brigade took them head-on.
You got the grid on that 9 T-72 suspected that we got from lead? We do. Okay, we're still sneaking up to take a look at that, but I don't want to go past these bunkers till we shoot above.
They combined pinpoint artillery with laser-guided rockets from multiple launch systems, and on call an Air Force F-16, falling like a rock on its target. It dropped cluster bombs. 2,800 separate detonations. From then on, it was a rout. Most of the Iraqis fled. Many hundreds surrendered, eager to be captured, thanking the Americans for the food and water. Some who tried to run were decapitated by their officers, their bodies left in their trenches. Those few who decided to fight died, turned to ash in their vehicles. Oddly enough, on this modern armored battlefield, there were almost no craters, only direct hits. And the 3rd Armored raced on, headed east into Kuwait, destroying more than an entire division's worth of Iraqi armor, leaving behind only their tracks and the glow of dead tanks burning in the desert dusk.
Officials say the Iraqis lost hundreds of tanks in the battle. Officials say as Allied forces approached from the west, elements of the Guard divisions came forward to meet them. But the Iraqis came under heavy fire, mainly from Apache helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft like the A-10. As they tried to turn and flee, Allied tanks used superior speed to outflank them, and their long-range guns to destroy many of the Iraqi tanks from so far away that the Iraqis could not fire back. The remaining tanks and troop carriers tried to fight their way eastward toward Basra, but officials say many of those were destroyed by pursuing aircraft. Officials say the Iraqi units appear to have been surprised by the Allied attack and once again seemed unable to coordinate their attack because of bad communications. This may explain why the Guards never moved south to defend Kuwait.
It was late afternoon, overcast, just inside Iraq. The British were preparing to go to war in full armored formation for the first time in 46 years. The tanks are out in front and either side of us. For 15 miles, no sign of the Iraqis. And then?
We think we may have a thermal contact vehicle dug in at about 4,000 in front of us.
It's the first outpost of a large entrenched Iraqi position. The battle group pauses and at 1 in the morning delivers its response. A bombardment by multi-launch rocket systems and 2 full regiments of 155mm howitzers firing for 23 minutes. The purpose is to make the Iraqis inclined to surrender rather than fight. Purpose achieved. They hadn't been fed for 4 days, hadn't been paid since November. Many of their officers had fled to Basra the night before, leaving the men to fend for themselves. And these are the lucky ones. They march from the battlefield as the British prepare another phase of the assault. The Iraqis have already endured one terrible pounding, and they're now about to take another. The gunners know the effect.
Well, if it was me, I think I feel a bit sorry for them, really, because the way they've been treated, I mean, you wouldn't treat a dog. The way I've seen some of the prisoners of wars, which we have on the way up as well. No, it's not fair for them.
This is what the army calls a replen, restocking the tanks with ammunition and fuel. And they're doing it also in the army term sharp, that is, close to the action. The Irish Hussars are about to launch a battle group attack. The Challenger tanks are churning into a sandstorm. Also ahead of them, what is or was the defensive position of a brigade of mechanized infantry. The target here is a T-55 tank, and small arms fire is returned. But not for long, as the battle group scorches everything in its path. In the inside of the day, the British have overrun the position, taken about 1,000 prisoners, some coming in from far out in the desert, and planted the flag in this corner of Iraq.
The 100-hour ground war left behind a battlefield littered with destroyed Iraqi tanks. A cemetery of twisted armor that revealed the destructive power of Allied tanks, artillery, and aircraft. U.S. commanders said of the 42 Iraqi divisions committed to the battle and their 4,200 tanks, less than one division remained intact and only about 300 tanks survived, most of them having fled back to Iraq. Cleaning up the battlefield meant blowing up disabled Iraqi tanks and artillery.
We're destroying a lot of the old equipment. Or not old equipment, well, they're old equipment, but we're making sure it's not going to be used again.
Other Iraqi armor was abandoned by soldiers who had surrendered. Some of the tanks will be shipped back to the United States for inspection and will be used in training.
The sheer weight of the Allied ground attack took the Iraqis by surprise. Thousands of Iraqi soldiers began surrendering, more than 5,000 after just 10 hours of battle. All along the front, demoralized and often hungry Iraqi soldiers were giving up after the first few shots of battle.
They are surrendering by the hundred. They are surrendering by the thousand. They are in bad shape physically, and mentally they appear to be crushed. Watch this pathetic scene as 4 Iraqi soldiers come out of their bunker.
Okay. Kneel down. Get down.
Iraqi soldiers were surrendering to Allied forces even before the ground war. But what was a trickle has now become a flood of tired, hungry, and dispirited men.
An integral part of the air campaign and the bombardments from the ground, which took place prior to the ground assault, was to attack the enemy's morale. Now, the early indications are that that has been very successful indeed.
So successful that it is presenting problems. Iraqi prisoners have to be sent south on the same pathways through minefields that Allied troops are using to travel north. They are to be turned over to Saudi forces and housed in tent compounds surrounded by barbed wire. The Saudis say they can accommodate 100,000. U.S. officials acknowledge that Iraqis captured so far are mostly frontline conscripts, not more disciplined troops like the Republican Guard. But these Iraqi soldiers are clearly glad that their war is over.
As in every war, the Gulf conflict produced a toll of wounded and dead. Here, deep inside Iraq, a Bradley fighting vehicle has been hit. Its crew said it was hit by friendly fire. One of the vehicle's soldiers, a sergeant, suffered a fractured hand and was rushed to a waiting helicopter. On board, the sergeant learned that his best friend had been killed. His body bag just brought on board. It is a picture of anguish. Still, the 4-day ground war produced remarkably few Allied casualties. Many American medical units, in fact, ended up helping the defeated Iraqis.
Thousands of Iraqi wounded prisoners of war are being given emergency medical treatment that had been intended for Americans. The quality of care is the same.
I guess you really don't look at them as enemy other than they're human beings too. They were sent over there to do a job just like we were sent here to do a job. Whoever wins, I guess we're going to win, but we still have to take care of them.
After being given treatment at a field hospital behind the front lines, the Iraqis are loaded aboard medical evacuation flights to take them farther to the rear. The system was set up to save lives, and it is working.
Are you glad these are not Americans?
That's the one part that I am glad, that the American casualty rate's low. We're seeing more enemy prisoners of war that have been injured, and we're moving them, so that's comforting in that sense.
In flight aboard an American C-130 medevac, the Iraqi soldiers are suffering from a wide range of war wounds, from bullets, shrapnel fragments, bomb blasts, burns, and combat shock.
Start another row! Let's go here!
Most of the prisoners were wounded on the first day of the ground war. For them, the war is over.
The more we pull them out, the sooner the war will be over. But generally, we just do patient care. We try not to think of them as the enemy because we have an oath within ourselves to take care of the patients.
Many of these wounded Iraqi soldiers who were left to die on the battlefield by their own retreating army now owe their lives to the emergency medical treatment of the United States military.
In the Gulf War, women played a greater role than they had in any of America's earlier conflicts. Almost 40% of military medical units were staffed by women. At this MASH unit, Lieutenant Linda McClory cared for a soldier wounded by a grenade, while another nurse, Amy Stewart, escaped for a moment from the bloodshed of war. Women warriors shared all duties but those directly on the front lines. Still, 2 were captured and 5 were killed in action. Women warriors in the Persian Gulf.
American women in the military, although they're not sent into direct combat, they're no strangers to war. Today, the U.S. operation in the Persian Gulf has been dubbed the Mommy's War. Of the 100,000 troops that have been sent into the region, 11,000 are women.
I was prepared physically, but not emotionally.
And for the first time, many have left behind children.
I'm standing there, and Barbara's signing through the bus window, "I love you," in sign language. Our daughter, Katie, is deaf. The bus pulls away, and I'm standing there with 3 kids howling like wolves, and there's nothing left to do but simply turn and walk away.
Women serve in service support units, but the simple fact is that service support units and furnishing support to combat units often find themselves up near the front.
Never before have women played as varied a role in the military as they do now. They fly the helicopters as well as service them. They transport ammunition to the front, closer to the front than ever before.
Helicopter pilot Major Marie Rossi, one of the first women to fly combat support, died when her Chinook crashed. We interviewed Major Rossi on the day the ground war started, and she said she felt well prepared.
Personally, as an aviator and as a soldier, this is the moment that everybody trains for, that I've trained for, so I feel ready to meet a challenge. I don't necessarily personally like it. If I had the opportunity that they called a ceasefire tomorrow, that would be great.
Army Specialist Christine Mays of Rochester Mills, Pennsylvania, was one of 5 women killed in action. Specialist Mays was killed along with 27 others when her barracks in Saudi Arabia was hit by a Scud missile. Specialist Mays left her engagement ring at home for fear of losing it in the war. And 20-year-old Army Private Adrian Mitchell of Moreno Valley, California. Private Mitchell also died when her barracks was hit by the Scud missile. Her father, a retired Air Force sergeant, said, "I did 30 years, 21 days, and I didn't get a scratch. My daughter's been in for 5 months, and she's dead."
There may never be a full accounting of Iraqi casualties, but the battlefield was a testament to the fury of the coalition attack. Even as a ceasefire was being negotiated, these Iraqi trucks were hit. The footprints of the fleeing enemy surrounded the convoy. And north of Kuwait City, an undisciplined column of retreating Iraqis, some 25 miles long, clogged the road to Basra. It was spotted by American pilots and attacked immediately with cluster bombs, missiles, and cannon fire.
This is how the Iraqi army's flight from Kuwait City ended. The devastation stretches across a 4-lane highway for nearly a mile and a half. When their escape route north was blocked by a brigade of Allied tanks, the Iraqis panicked, creating a massive traffic jam. They were hit where they stood, first by U.S. bombs, then by tanks. The battle between Tiger Brigade and the fleeing Iraqis only lasted an hour. The Iraqis never hit one U.S. tank. General, what went through your mind when you saw the destruction, the Iraqi tanks?
The total horror of war. It just showed the awesome firepower of what the U.S. forces, the coalition forces, put against this guy when he started to run.
The remains of the battle tell the story. Iraqi soldiers trying to escape on foot killed as they fled. The engines of many of the vehicles still running 48 hours later. And the spoils they were trying to take with them scattered everywhere.
I mean, they were taking anything that seemed to be of value. It's amazing. It really is. These guys were raping this country.
Amid the tanks and artillery, hundreds of stolen cars filled with stolen goods. Inside ambulances, piles of weapons. No one knows how many Iraqis were killed here, only a few hundred yards from this monument to Saddam Hussein.
Allied success in the Gulf War was due in large part to massive amounts of armaments assembled to fight Iraq. Powerful B-52 bombers flew from as far away as England to hit targets in the desert. A combination of cluster bombs and smart bombs was used with devastating results. Patriot missile batteries shot down Scuds over Saudi Arabia and Israel. And on the ground, a lesson in desert warfare. An army lives and dies by its supplies. Allied successes rode on efficient logistics and on the high-tech arsenal used against Saddam Hussein.
The first lesson field commanders learned was that realistic training was every bit as important as high-technology weaponry. The speed of the coalition's success made the victory appear easy. But for 6 months, Marine and Army units trained for the worst, learning how to cut through or breach Iraqi defensive barriers and minefields. The Allies won quickly for another reason. As Tony Cordesman discovered during a tour of the battlefield, initially everyone overestimated the difficulty of Iraqi defenses. Many of the oil trenches designed to create a wall of fire were never lit. And these rows of barbed wire were easily breached.
We're standing in the Iraqi forward positions, the ones we thought would be so formidable. There's something oddly pathetic about this area. This is supposed to be a tank trench, a tank trap. It is not deep enough, and the only thing it ever caught was an Iraqi vehicle pointed south, caught in its own trench.
Before the war, there were widespread, well-documented difficulties with much of the American military equipment in the Gulf. But once such systems as the Apache attack helicopter received 24-hour servicing and attention, much more than in peacetime, it was effective. The M1A1 tank also proved highly lethal, but required constant filter cleaning and track greasing. Its enormous thirst for fuel required long trains of supply trucks, which sometimes had trouble keeping up.
We were reaching the limits of fuel. Fuel was coming behind us. In another 4 hours, we were ready to go again. But fuel was the major thing that we had to watch very closely.
The longer range of American and British tank guns allowed the Allies to attack from as far as 1.5 miles away and stay out of Iraqi range. But it was new thermal sights that read heat sources day and night that gave Allied tank gunners the targeting edge and the critical element of surprise.
We were using passive thermal imaging, using a system we call a thermal observation and gunnery sight, which enabled us really to effectively take on Iraqi tanks at those ranges without him realizing we were there or without him expecting the incoming fire.
Although the Allies' training, equipment, and tactics were impressive, their success on the battlefield was sealed by Iraqi failures in every critical aspect of the war. The Iraqis did have more artillery with longer range than the Allies, but they lost that advantage because the Allies' air campaign disrupted their command, control, and communications.
His artillery turned out not to be effective because we overran him so quickly that he was incapable of repositioning his artillery to make an impact on what we were doing.
There has been an enormous impact on the reputation of Soviet-designed equipment, especially older models used by the Iraqis.
People talk about the rugged nature of Soviet equipment, but the vehicle I'm standing on was a death trap in Afghanistan, and it's been a death trap in Kuwait. One round into this vehicle sets off the fuel and the ammunition. The crew can't get out the narrow doors. It burns inside the vehicle, and that has happened again and again and again.
American military leaders are proud of their troops, their plans, their equipment. But some of them are already worried about success breeding complacency.
What we have to be concerned about is that every enemy isn't going to cave in as this one did. And as long as we keep that in the back of our minds, I think we'll be okay for the future.
That may be the most valuable lesson of the war.
U.S. Ambassador to Kuwait, Skip Ghanim, raising anew the American flag over the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait City. 7 months after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, his army was defeated and Kuwait was liberated.
I want you to know I was ready to come in August, and the Iraqis got here first. And I remember when I saw the president the first week of August, he said to me, "Skip, you're going to Kuwait." And I never once doubted that, and we've been working hard to get here.
USA! USA! USA!
I'd like just to take this opportunity to thank all the American people and to thank Mr. Bush and all the American Army in USA. Thank you.
I feel I'm on top of the world. How do I feel? Where do you come from?
We come from the United States.
Oh, welcome. Well, we thank you so much.
I'm free. I'm free. I must be free.
Triumph in the Desert. This has been a special presentation of ABC News.